this is for entertainment and educational purposes.
Antifa's bad, really bad.
In the past year, it seems like Antifa has been everywhere. Building burned down in Minnesota, Antifa. Looting in Soho, probably Antifa. Capitol violently overrun by people wearing MAGA hats, definitely Antifa in disguise. And while we've been told that Antifa is a well-organized, well-funded network of violent extremists, historian Mark Bray says that's not it at all.
Where's my Soros check?
It's a radical left politics of opposition to the far right that doesn't rely on the police or the courts or the state to stop the fascist threat.
Because they are fascists. Because they're getting paid by the fascists. So you can't rely on them.
Sometimes I compare it to feminism, right? There are feminist groups, but feminism itself is not a group. There are Antifa groups, but Antifa itself is not a group.
We're waking up, we're realizing, and we're protesting our politicians. We're letting them know we're awake. And they are scared for some reason. Probably because they do easy money.
Germany, and many other anti-fascist forces in Europe and around the world.
Throughout World War II, fascists were pretty easy to spot. That became a little harder once they'd stopped wearing their brown shirts.
Many former fascists adjusted the language they used to describe their politics, adjusted the way they presented it, tried to sort of leech off of the left-wing politics to make themselves more appealing. Anti-fascism, or Antifa, became this militant kind of rebirth of anti-fascism that refused to trust in the state or the government to stop the far right, and willingly pushing them out of public spaces from below, in football stadiums, in punk venues, in communities. The anti-fascist argument is that you don't let fascism grow in any kinds of public or cultural spaces. And so these battles have been going on in these venues for decades.
So like 5 years ago, there's a radical left, but I didn't think I never heard the word Antifa. When did Antifa become a weapon, rhetorically speaking, for the right, saying, hey, like the leftists want to ruin the country?
Most of the left didn't really care in the early 2010s. Anti-fascism was considered a low priority. It started to
punk
change,
rock was everywhere.
With Donald Trump's presidential campaign.
You were like,
so that's when it started to be more well known among the left, and it took off in mainstream conversation. You can see a first step with the punching of Richard Spencer on Trump's inauguration day, even more so with the protest against Milo Yiannopoulos in Berkeley, when there was mass property destruction to shut down this event. Antifa was in the news then, and then it was a fait accompli with Charlottesville, when the fascists killed Heather Heyer. I thought that was sort of the end of the story for a little bit as far as the mainstream was concerned, but then Donald Trump's conspiracy theory accusations during the George Floyd protests last year brought that into the conversation, and now it's a staple of the right-wing boogeyman industry.
All the violence is with these black hooded thugs, Antifa.
Is there any indication that Antifa elements were involved in antagonizing insurrectionist acts in the riot at the Capitol, the violence that we've seen politically these days?
Not really. Antifa groups are not numerous enough, and their membership is not significant enough, and their political influence is not significant enough for them to have had a disproportionate role in what was the largest mass uprising the U.S. has seen in half a century.
The difference between people like us and Antifa, BLM, we respect the law, we were good people. The government did this to us. We were normal, good, law-abiding citizens, and you guys did this to us. We want our country back.
And all those stories about rich liberals like George Soros paying Antifa thugs to go stir shit up.
This kind of anti-authoritarian bottom-up.
I'm still waiting for my check. Where's my check?
Kind of organizing doesn't rely on a lot of money. Accepting a donation from a millionaire would be anathema to what the anti-capitalist politics are anyway.
I understand there are some people who are anti-fascist who reject the use of violence as a tactic. There are those who use violence as a tactic. Why specifically violence as an anti-fascist tactic when you're confronting fascists?
The Antifa argument is that you don't let Nazis or fascists take even the first step towards achieving power, because it's easier strategically to stop them before they've gotten there. That's not to say that violence is necessarily the first step. Most of what Antifa groups do involves monitoring the far right, figuring out who their leaders are, tracking them across different social media platforms, and then doing whatever they standardize and grow and establish themselves in society.
Yeah.
We can't just say violence equals violence. Why it's done, who it's done against, in what context matters a great deal. There's a big difference between attacking people of color or queer and trans people because of their identities on the right side versus attacking those who do that.
Yeah.
That's a big difference, even if we disagree.
Right. Hello. Hello. If you're protecting them, fuck you. No, they don't have a right. They don't have a right to hide and be the fucking scumbag. No, they don't have a right to hide and be racist, hurtful people.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in Los Angeles with Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. As we continue our coverage of the U.S. and Israeli war on Iran and the widening regional war, we go now to Israel. On Thursday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu proclaimed a new Middle East as Israel escalates its attacks on Iran and Lebanon.
Even now, it can be said with certainty, this is no longer the same Iran, this is no longer the same Middle East, and this is also not the same Israel. We are not waiting, we are initiating, we are attacking, and we are doing so with force which has not been seen before.
We go now to Tel Aviv, where we are joined by the award-winning Israeli journalist Gideon Levy. He writes from Haaretz and is a member of its editorial board. His latest pieces include "Everyone in this country has gone insane," and "The Israeli media are first and foremost IDF soldiers." Levy's latest book welcome back to Democracy Now! I know you've just come out of a bomb shelter, an air shelter. If you could describe the scene inside there, and then why you say your country has gone crazy, and also talk about the media coverage.
First of all, going to the shelter is always a very strange experience. We kind of got used and we never got to get used. And it kind of became routine, and it will never be a normal routine. Day and night, we are going quite often now also at nights. I can't foresee how this can last for many weeks or months, God forbid, but you know, in Ukraine, they hardly have shelters. So at least in part of Israel, not all over Israel, but at least in part of Israel, we can be protected. Now to your other questions. There is a strange phenomenon in which this war is so highly popular in Israeli public opinion, or in Jewish Israeli public opinion. I never saw such a thing. 93% of the Israelis Jews, according to a last survey by the Israeli Democracy Institute, 93% of the Israelis support this war. Those are North Korean figures. In no democracy, there is such a figure in a survey about any kind of question. 93% support the war. And this comes after 2.5 years of another war, which didn't conclude with big success. I mean, the war in Gaza, 70,000 victims, 1,000 babies killed. What for? What did Israel gain exactly? But let's put it aside. Where are we aiming now? Where does this lead us? Nobody knows. I mean, all kind of slogans and cliches in the air, changing regimes. And meanwhile, there are 6 million, just right now they count to mention it, 6 million human beings are now homeless because of Israel. Can you imagine yourself? 3.2 in Lebanon.
Oh, I think. I guess.
800,000 in Lebanon, 3.2
The
in
cable
Iran, and another 2 million in Gaza.
Yeah, I didn't put this all in.
This should really lead us to some
All right.
questions. Do we have the right to do those things? Do we achieve anything? Where are we aiming? What will be the moment after? But unfortunately, the discourse and the Israeli media as a whole are not ready even to discuss those questions. When you speak about 93% of the population which supports this war, you have to understand that they are exposed to 100% of agreeing with the war in the media, mainly in the TV. There is no room for any question marks or doubts about this war. And the more it develops, the more suspicious it seems. So here we are again.
Well, given at the same time, though, are you saying that the overwhelming percentage of the Israeli Jews, but there's 21% of Israel that are Arab, citizens of Israel. We're not talking about the occupied territories. So there's obviously has to be a different perspective among those Arabs who are citizens of Israel, doesn't there?
So first of all, nobody counts them. Their voice has no influence, neither in the parliament, even though they vote and can be elected, nor in the public discourse. Nobody counts them. Nobody listens to what they have to say, so they are totally irrelevant. And many times not legitimate. If you want the figure was 23% of them support this war. I mean, a tiny minority relative to the vast majority of Jews, and this is quite understandable. I even wonder who are those 23% who support this war, but this is the figure.
Right. I wanted to ask you also about the level of, it seems to me, overextension of the Israeli military. We're talking about Israel is now involved in hostilities, not just in Iran and still in attacking Gaza. There are, in the West Bank, obviously there are Israeli soldiers deployed there, in Lebanon, in Syria. There are still Israeli troops in Syria, and conceivably even in Iraq, because there have been attacks now. It's not clear whether it's from Israel or the United States on popular mobilization forces in Iraq in the past few
Surprising
days.
like I thought it would.
How is it possible for the leaders of Israel to think they can continue this on any kind of long-term basis?
The fact is that they can. And maybe they are implementing the vision of your ambassador, your official ambassador, Mike Huckabee, who just said recently in an interview that Israel should be between the Nile and the rivers of Iraq. In other words, he believes that Israel, that the entire Middle East belongs to Israel. Maybe we are on a stage of implementing the vision of His Excellency, the Ambassador of the United States of Israel, who I can't understand on which behalf did he speak. Does he represent your administration, your public opinion, your president? Who exactly in the United States think that Israel should rule the entire Middle East because some God in ancient times promised it?
I did. Oh, there we go. Stupid button.
To see that such an ambassador continues to represent the United States Israel. But Israel is doing as much as it can. And it can. As long as the American support is so massive, so high, so much, this will go on. The moment the United States will see it in a different way, this will stop. And it's very clear that it means a lot. Almost like we say that the more complaints down the United States, which enable all this, rather than to Israel, which tries as much as it can to conquer more, to cover more, and to launch more wars.
You know, Levi, you recently wrote a piece in Haaretz about the Abu Alas family, who live in the town of Kabatia in the Jenin district of the occupied West Bank. Two sons of the family were killed almost exactly 10 years apart by Israeli soldiers. Both were 17 years old at the time of their deaths. You write that in December, Rayan was walking down the street in his neighborhood when he was killed. The shooting caught on security footage that you published in your reporting. In the video, you can
Thin
see two
pancakes,
Israeli
man.
soldiers
That's
waiting
a lot of
behind a
baking
wall.
powder.
Ryan enters the frame, walking in their direction. The soldiers step out and shoot him at close range, less than 6 feet away.
Yes, and I published this story, years ago. And already this week I bring another story of two brothers, but at this time they were both shot at the same time, not 10 years. Those brothers were killed in a gap of 10 years, less than a week, by the way, to be very precise. This week I was in another village, and I was 6 years ago.
Special ham. Canadian bacon.
Because we're seeing U.S. reporters who are based in Tel Aviv giving us great footage of the destruction in the Gulf states and of the bombs in Iran, but very little of what is actually going on in Israel in terms of the structural damage that the missiles and the drones from Iran are causing within Israel.
Unfortunately, the Israeli media, or the mainstream media, assumed being the press or a journalistic over a long time ago. You are talking about not showing the damages in Tel Aviv. What did Israeli TV show about what Israel had put for 2.5 years in Gaza? Nothing. Any potato grower in Idaho saw more of Gaza than someone in Tel Aviv watches only Israeli TV. Now, when it comes to this war, they show here and there also the damaging in Israel. There are some censorship restrictions, quite limited, so they will not direct their bombing according to the place that the missiles fall, but this is marginal. We don't have a free press. I mean, we have a free press. This is much worse. But this free press puts itself under self-censorship and thinks that in times of war and also in other times, the press is just an agency of the government and of the military establishment. And this is very worrying.
You know, it's accepted that Israel does not allow international journalists into Gaza, and it's not talked about. CNN always prefaces their reporting from their journalist who is in Tehran, Iran, as saying it's controlled, though it's not controlled editorially, they say. They do not continually repeat the same thing for their reporters in Israel. It's critical to talk about Gaza. Your next book, Peter Levy, is about Gaza, and also your continued coverage, which we hear very little about, of the West Bank. You also talk about the communities of Sassia there. If you can talk about that as an example of what's happening and the terror Palestinians are facing there.
Under the cover of the war,
Canadian bacon, Wally.
West Bank is changing dramatically,
Listen to
and only for the better. What the settlers together with how we did in the last 2
on the
years
world.
is
Americans
unprecedented and irreversible.
Continued
They really changed the life. You can
fascist
just
smoke
go
show.
in the roads and understand that this is not the occupied,
Smoke
oppressed West
screen.
Bank that you knew before, because it's much worse now. Right now, almost all the villages and towns in the West Bank are locked. And when I say locked, I mean locked by metal gates.
Don't be fooled if you don't vote Democrat, you vote
The
Republican
whole
like.
West Bank looks like a collection of concentration camps. No other way to describe it. People are not allowed ever since the war started. People are not allowed to eat, people are not allowed to get out. In a few places, the checkpoints are open for a few hours, but you never know if you'll be able to come back. Nothing is planned, and the whole attitude of the army dramatically changed ever since the war in Gaza. In the same time, the center saw the war in Gaza and now in Iran as a huge historical opportunity for them. They took over tens of thousands of acres all over the West Bank by force. And they kicked out, they are kicking out the population, the farmers, the shepherds, one community after the other, after months and months of tyranny of violent settlers, many times in uniforms. They have no other choice but to give up, to surrender, and to leave their homes, their villages, and their fields. This is a process. It's not one incident here and one incident here. Pogroms are a daily thing now. Nobody brings people to justice after those pogroms. And the West Bank is changing dramatically. I know already about dozens of villages which were evacuated because the people cannot take it anymore, the Palestinians.
Gideon Levy, we want to thank you for being with us. Award-winning Israeli journalist, writes for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, is a member of the editorial board there. His latest opinion pieces we'll link to. Everyone in this country has gone insane, and the Israeli media are first and foremost IDF soldiers. Gideon Levy's latest book is titled The Killing of Gaza, Reports on a Catastrophe. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcasts, and so much more.
Here's Don't Be a Sucker. U.S. National Archives.
This looks like a fake, doesn't it? Well, it is a fake. But here's a fella who's willing to bet his hard-earned money on it.
And wrestling.
Henry here got on the train with $200. He couldn't see any harm in a friendly game of cards. What if the other men were strangers? And take Joe Collins. He's got a nice wife at home. But he met this girl at the bar, and she looked kind of cute after the first couple of drinks.
Getting robbed. Yeah, getting this. I don't know why that was being suggested. That's hilarious.
If you use Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, YouTube.
Get beyond that. Real quick. There we go.
The leader who promises fascism is a cult of the leader who promises national restoration in the face of supposed humiliation by immigrants, leftists, liberals, minorities, homosexuals, women, in the face of what the fascist leader says is a takeover of the country's media, cultural institutions, schools by these forces. And that's why you need a really macho, powerful, violent response. The fascist leader says he will solve the problem. fascism is right-wing by nature. It's based on ultranationalism. However, you can have ultranationalist movements that are ultranationalist movements of minority groups. There is left-wing authoritarianism. There are bad things on the left.
Oregon.
Stalin killed many people. Mao killed many people. These
Oregon
are
is
terrible figures.
completely
but not
taken
all
over by the
terrible
left.
things are fascist. Fascism is a very particular ideological structure. When thinking about fascism, you can't think about these individual elements in isolation. They come as a bundle. My name is Jason Stanley. I'm the Jacob Urowski Professor of Philosophy at Yale University and the author of 5 books, most recently, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. We forget that many fascist regimes started off as democratic political parties. We forget that Hitler, the Nazi Party, ran in an election. Fascist parties start as fascist social and political movements.
Oregon is super fascist,
So it's important to see
even though it's democratic and
even in
Democrat.
societies that do not have a fascist regime.
You don't get a say here anymore. They take care of you. They tell you what is going to happen.
Look, we're Polish people.
That's what Tina keeps trying to do.
We're sheep herders, and another bunch of Polish people.
Tina didn't want this transportation bill to go to the public as for a vote. She fought tooth and nail. And she kept trying to get secret elections, quiet elections, so she can get her money and give it to.
And in the past, the dominant racial group ruled over others. And then the fascist leader says, that has been taken from you by the leftists and communists. They want to weaken our military. They want to weaken our greatness. Propaganda is ubiquitous and everyone uses propaganda. In political propaganda, your main message is something other than the information you're conveying. Fascist propaganda is a very particular structure. It's based around a friend-enemy distinction. The political opponent, they are a merciless threat to your very existence and your traditions. They are the other. When they are in charge, it subverts the nation. So the structure, fascist propaganda, is based on the idea that the other are fundamentally opposed to the nation. As Hitler says in Mein Kampf, science is only useful insofar as it strengthens the nation. Fascism is a cult of the leader. It involves the leader setting the rules about what's true and false. So any kind of expertise, reality, all of that is a challenge to the authority of the leader. If science can help him, then he can say, okay, I'll use it. Institutions that teach multiple perspectives on history in all its complexity are always the center of democracy is truth. You're not free if you've been lied to. Nobody thinks the people of North Korea are free.
Yep.
The people of North Korea will vote for dear leader every time.
We're all being lied to in America, though, but we're being allowed to lie to ourselves and listen to each other's bullshit.
Equality similarly requires truth. Because equality in democracy doesn't mean we all have the same amount of money. It doesn't mean we all have the same car. It means political equality. That each of our voices matters the same. And political equality means speaking truth to power. Someone really powerful is humiliated when they're caught lying. That's the core of political equality.
We're not allowed to do that in
Rip
Oregon.
the heart out of democracy, you get people used to
Eugene
lie.
especially.
Here's a fact about humans. We all pretty much suck to the same degree. One group of us is not better than another. Hierarchy is central here because it's the big lie at the center of things. What is racism but one big lie? Racism is the lie that one group is better than another. You're told this religion is better, this race is better, this gender is better. It's really a moral claim, has more moral worth. And then once you have hierarchy set up, you can make people very nervous and frightened about losing their position on that hierarchy.
Your teenager developed depression, anxiety, or eating disorders after becoming addicted to social media platforms. A global settlement may be coming in 2025. These platforms allegedly failed to protect vulnerable youth from addictive algorithms and harmful content for years, putting their mental health at risk.
Yeah.
And now landmark laws.
Hierarchy goes right into victimhood, because once you convince people that they are justifiably higher on the hierarchy, then you can tell them that they're victims of equality. German Christians are victims of Jews. White Americans are victims of Black American equality. Men are victims of feminism. Once you convince people that they should be better, that they have earned a position in the hierarchy over others, then you can tell them that equality is actually victim. Loyalty to the dominant group means law-abidingness. And the minority group is by its nature not law-abiding.
No.
Law and order in fascist politics means the members of the minority group who accept their subservient role, they're law-abiding, and the members of the dominant group, by their very nature, are law-abiding. By definition, the leader can't violate law and order. So law and order doesn't mean justice. Law and order doesn't mean equality. Law and order structures who's legitimate and who's not. Everywhere around the world, no matter what the situation is, in very different socioeconomic conditions, the fascist leader comes and tells you, your women and children are under threat. You need a strong man to protect your families. They make conservatives hysterically afraid of transgender rights or homosexuality, other ways of living. These are not people trying to live their own lives. They're trying to destroy your life, and they're coming after your children. What the fascist politician does is they take conservatives who aren't fascist at all, and they say, look, I know you might not like my ways. You might think I'm a womanizer. You might think I'm violent in my rhetoric, but you need someone like me now.
Sound
you
familiar?
need someone like me, because homosexuality, it isn't just trying for equality. It's coming after your family. Fascist movements typically, though not invariably, rest on an urban-rural divide. The cities are where there's decadence,
3 or 4
where the elites
bacons
congregate, where there's immigrants, there's criminality, there's Sodom and Gomorrah. In the city, there's a real war.
3 or 4 bacons. Milk. 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 So damn much welcome. Let's eat it now.
The pure, hardworking, real members of the nation live in the rural areas where they work hard with their hands. When our politicians talk about inner city voters or urban voters, we all know what they mean. Arbeit macht frei, work shall make you free. This was written on the gates of Auschwitz. The idea is that the minority, they're lazy and they need to be made to work.
That's
free
crazy.
labor. The minority group, the leftists, they're lazy by their nature, and it gives them a workout. Labor unions are run by communists who are trying to make things easier. Hard work is a virtue. In liberal democracy, we don't value people by how hard they work. What would happen to disabled people who can't work? They would then have no value. It's why the Nazis had the T4 program to murder the disabled, because the disabled were lebensunwertiges Leben, life unworthy of life, because to be valued is to be capable of hard work. Each of these individual elements is not in and of itself fascist, but you have to worry when they're all grouped together. When honest conservatives are lured into fascism by people who tell them, look, it's an existential fight. I know you don't accept everything we do, you don't accept every doctrine, but your family is under threat. Your family is at risk. So without us, you are in peril. Those moments are the times when we need to worry about fascism.
Get smarter, faster with new videos every week from the world's biggest thinkers.
That was over. It was a good one.
Why is it difficult to identify fascism? Well, the first, the main reason I think is that it's bad news. And with bad news, with inconvenient truth, the natural response is denial. The most famous form of denial related to inconvenient truth was the report of the Club of Rome, 1972. Limits to the growth, which was the first scientific report to make clear for the whole world that the ongoing economic growth in an industrial society will have devastating consequences for the planet. And the denial was enormous for decades. Now the denial is no longer possible, and governments try to do what they do, and there's Greenpeace and other organizations.
Yep, a lot of this is about
how the world, how the planet would have looked like if at that time people would have realized, yes, it's an inconvenient truth, but they are right.
Yeah.
And we wasted time. So the first part, to say, look, there is a return of fascism is an inconvenient truth. The second thing is
Nice.
it's very embarrassing. After World War II, especially in my part of the world, where fascism came from Europe, at our commemoration day, we will say never again. That's what we said all the time, never again. And so the whole idea that this terrible, terrible thing of fascism would be big was, out of the question.
Not great.
The third element is the phenomenon of we do not know our history anymore.
Nope.
There is a kind of political amnesia,
Yeah.
and so we have forgotten some extreme important warnings, which the warnings did not come from the political scientists. The warnings came from important artists, novelists like Albert Camus and Thomas Mann. Two great artists who lived through the era of fascism. And in 1947, independent of each other, said, don't make the mistake. World War II is over, but fascism did not disappear. Camus even wrote a very important novel about it. La Peste, the Plague.
You're welcome,
Trying to
lady.
explain, look, this phenomenon of fascism is there to stay because it's the dark side of every democracy. In every democracy it is possible that at the very moment the spirit of democracy is gone, then you'll get a society, which we now call a mass society.
Like the timer didn't go down. It was on, but it wasn't. Timer wasn't going down, and it wasn't spinning. The microwave, it was on, but the timer wasn't going down, and it wasn't spinning. It was just on, going like the light was on. I had to open it and close it, and it started working.
Hatred, propaganda, stupidity, and there is where the demagogues and the populists will move in, and they will present their own version of fascism. But we don't recognize it again because the idea is, well, we know fascism is a bad thing, but in our, media, Bollywood-oriented visual culture, look, in a visual culture, evil has to be very visible. Look at Batman, right? Batman, handsome guy, and who's the evil guy? The Joker, and you immediately see that is an evil man, right? In James Bond, you immediately recognize who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. So we think that if there's evil in our society, you have to immediately to see it, right? And so fascism probably will have swastikas, black uniforms, and silly gestures, and now, of course, the fringe are always those lunatics who would like to present themselves, oh, we are fascists, or we are Nazis, or whatever.
Right.
We cannot do, I mean, you know, those images are always there. But the fascism in our time presents itself in forms of our time. So we have to look at the characteristics, because the characteristics will be the same. Every time, everybody who looks at this will be different next year and 5 years from now. Okay, because that's the time. At the same time, it's not the same. Because our characteristics are different. And so, what are the characteristics of a fascist culture? In a fascist culture, you always have, and again, you know, the terrible examples of Mussolini and Franco and Hitler, they count. The fascist leader will always come forward in a time of crisis. He, most of the time it's he, will present himself as the anti-political leader who will cure a society of all social evils. You know, a kind of new messiah, it's a cult figure. It will always be a form of extreme nationalism, you know, to make the country great again. That's a very old phrase every fascist will use. Deprived of any positive idea, not even interested in it, because those fascist leaders are completely obsessed by self-interest. It's all about them, and nothing else. They know they have to use, you know, all kinds of propaganda to captivate and brainwash and manipulate people. Again, this is also an old story. I mean, there's some, interestingly enough, the full causes of Sigmund Freud, Mr. Bernays, came here to America in the 20s. And he wrote a small essay, still available in propaganda. And Bernays became the godfather of marketing. And he became also very rich because he was one of those people who at that time managed to make women smug. And he also could use the techniques of his uncle Sigmund Freud. But anyway, it is as in propaganda. He, in a very honest way, said, look, you know, of course, America is a democracy in Washington with the president.
Oh, Sigmund Freud made women smug. Oh, that's why they use. I didn't realize it was Sigmund Freud. Nephew of the reason why psychology is used in marketing.
Because we can control the mind of the people by marketing, by propaganda. Why not? So, interestingly enough, when the Nazis came to power in the 30s, he got in touch with
she might be hiding. She likes sleeping anyways.
I know those people. Not personally, but I know the goals because I know their techniques. Probably I can help you because we will have the wall of propaganda. So, anyway, propaganda. Okay. The other thing is all fascists will be
There she
I went on purpose, and if she was, she said, I don't want to come out for no reason. It's like, oh, and I kind of flopped around. Like, fine, whatever. Flopped around and left.
okay, so there is
like
this thing of
rushing out, trying to rush out.
and the demand of complete loyalty. Then, because, you know, the crisis is there, so they always are in need of a scapegoat. The Jews, or the Mexicans, or the black people, or people from Poland or whatever, they always are in need of a scapegoat.
The Irish.
They are always in need of, you know, new enemies.
Irish and German immigrants. It was Irish and German immigrants before.
The thing is that fascism is a political expression of our lowest human instincts.
and there is a leader who knows how to use it, and you'll get a very corrosive process in your democracy. One, we should never
They were trying to
forget
use them as slaves up north.
two things about this. We should never forget that Hitler could come into power through a democratic process. It was a democratic process. And even more telling than that, he lost the popular vote. He had 11 million voters and 22 million voters did not vote for him. But the political parties, the power elite at that time thought, well, you know, we can use the guy, we can control him, we give him this responsibility, then people will understand, you know, what kind of failure he is, etc., etc., etc. So many things as we're seeing here right now. And then there's this terrible blind spot. So even one of the great heroes of the 20th century, Winston Churchill, on February 1933, so Hitler was already in power. He gave a speech for the League Against Socialism, because as a real conservative, for Churchill, socialism was one of the terrible things, and he immediately related it to Bolshevism, etc. In this lecture he gave them, he says, quote unquote, in Italy it was Mussolini. Mussolini is the Italian genius of law, and his fascism might be the strategy for our future. Churchill in 1933.
Wow.
I mean, it took him even a couple of more years to realize what the connection is between Mussolini and Hitler. So, if even a Churchill, you know, can make this mistake, he was not the only one. I mean, even Freud, in the 30s, dedicated one of his books to Mussolini. And there was a whole lineup of hundreds of intellectuals who wanted to see Mussolini, who was not only a politician, but he was also a poet. He wrote plays, etc., etc., etc.
They wanted kings. They wanted to rewrite the king.
Fascism always comes with a huge temptation. This is also the reason why so many intellectuals and so many artists,
a new king.
On the one hand, they could go after Stalin and thought, you know, Stalin is the new messiah, but they also felt, you know, tempted to fascism. So if you all put all these things together, we realize that, again, in moments of crisis, when people are losing trust in their own political system, which is happening, when there is, you know, when the democratic spirit is going out, a new anti-democratic spirit will come in. And if we have bad luck, and we are now having a lot of bad luck in Europe and here, there is this leader with a fascist mindset.
I like democracy. I love democracy. I love being able to vote. I love having a right. And I love other people having a right too. I love that people can check me and make sure that I'm not being a complete fucking fool.
Well, Yale philosophy professor Jason Stanley sees January 6, 2021 as part of a history of fascist impulses in American politics. That's the focus of his book, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. And in his latest article in The Guardian, he called America is now in fascism's legal phase. He spoke with Michelle Martin about what he calls an extremely critical moment for democracy across the world.
Thanks, Biana. Professor Jason Stanley, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, one of the reasons we called you is that you have issued in recent weeks a rather dire warning. You are
stick around and listen.
That this
We're
is
explaining,
a pivotal
explaining
moment
what
in the
fascism
life of
is.
this country. Why do you say that?
It's a pivotal moment because right now we're seeing the legal mechanisms to steal an election being formalized. We're seeing a system put in place that will enable permanent minority rule.
You said that we are now in the legal phase, and you see historical precedents for this, and you say it's almost like a conversation that has gone on for a century between the Americans who have fascist solutions to national problems and kind of the European experience. And you're saying now this sort of two-way conversation is resurgent in the United States through legal means. Many conservatives, many of the most prominent conservatives sort of scoff at the criticism of these, what they call voter integrity measures. They say that some of these measures that are being enacted in the southern states and also really in states around the country, that they're just trying to
Try to go outside. What a good boy.
confidence in our election systems. How do
Go
you respond to
outside.
that?
Always say about your opponent what you are yourself doing. We're seeing massive projection. We're even seeing the fascist label being thrown at Democrats, right?
Yeah.
So projection is a standard propaganda.
What?
It was
That
one
was
that
asking it.
Goebbels and Hitler both explicitly recommended, but it's not just fascists who engage in it. But we're seeing this massive projection. It's almost like you can tell what the Republicans are doing by what they say the Democrats are doing. We have to interrogate this. Electoral integrity. What does that mean here? Well, you have to filter it through a kind of fascist loyalist lens, which means only the real people of the country should get to determine who the leaders are. And so it's not a really fair election if everyone gets to vote. And we're seeing this again and again. We're seeing Republicans, including former President Trump, say this. If we don't pass these laws, everyone will vote. We're seeing them being very explicit. So the idea is that a real election is one where only the real Americans vote. And this goes back to this idea, which is unfortunately, unless things radically change, going to be a reality of a permanent minority running this country who, in the eyes of that minority, are the real Americans.
We already see this on the Supreme Court. I mean, the reality of it is the United States Supreme Court is dominated by people whose political ideologies do not match the majority of the country in any way. The question I have for you, though, is what's appealing about this to so many Americans? And you make a point, like other scholars.
I think it's the power. I think it's a lot of Americans actually are realizing that they're Romans, and then they're like, "Oh, awesome! I'm gonna stay the Roman." Like it sucks. But there's a lot more. There's a lot more like sociopaths out there that want to realize.
Wealthy business people who presumably have everything they could ever want, have massive influence in our society, whose companies are fueled in large part by the labor and creativity of many diverse people. So what's the appeal to some of these folks?
Power, simply put. We can't forget that, people aren't racist by their nature. Racism is something that the powerful use to split the powerless. This is something, an analysis that dates back to W.E.B. Du Bois's masterwork, Black Reconstruction, which is still the best work about the American ideology. The wealthy elite faced a labor movement, poor whites, poor blacks, joining together in a labor movement. So racism was used to split them apart. Racism is a mechanism of power, which is why you see many people who aren't personally racist at all, or simply
I was asking how much you put money.
exploiting any means
Fine.
they can.
It's so good.
Supporting
Well,
any
we'll do
kind
that.
of mass panic.
That's the original syrup for a pancake.
To push
Mesopotamia, they
to vote for an extremist,
ate
an
honeyed-
extremist movement
honeyed pancakes.
that's going to pad their pockets. And this is also consonant with the past. It's consonant with the past and fascist movements across the world right now. Like in Hungary, many business elites, particularly in the hydrocarbon business.
Such as those in the hydrocarbon business, as well as social and religious movements with roots in the Confederacy. But the other point you made is that, this is something we hear a lot of journalists in Washington, D.C. say all the time, is that, these guys in Congress, these people in Congress, they know that this is all, made up. So what's in it for them? Like, why continue to maintain this mythology? Especially when the person who advanced this mythology, the former president, is no longer in office.
Again, power.
So let's look at the people who are sort of leading this charge against democracy. Ted Cruz, went to Princeton and Harvard Law. Totalitarian government restricting our freedoms with COVID policy. They know exactly what they're doing. What are they doing? They're trying to create the idea that the government, the current government, is authoritarian, that it's corrupt, that it's destroying our children. It's a threat to our children. This is what the critical race theory stuff panic is about. And that you need a strong man to protect the nation and your children from this terrible threat. Look, as long as COVID keeps raging, you can keep the politics of fear and panic alive. If you keep the politics of fear and panic alive, people will set aside democracy. People will say, I just want to be protected from this. They're not going to be able to think reasonably and rationally. You need to present your enemy, your internal enemy. So fascist politics works by saying there's a nefarious internal enemy who's working in tandem with the minorities to overthrow the government and control your children. And so what you do is you make society complete. You put people in an incredibly anxious and fearful state where they're looking for some kind of simple explanation. And a conspiracy theory is a kind of very simple explanation that people can grab onto. They're controlling the schools. We're hearing a lot about the schools. And there are very real worries here. I mean, we all want our children back in school, and we want that dealt with. But, you know, the way to deal with that is to address the COVID crisis. But no, instead, many Republicans are leaning into the COVID crisis because they want to make it worse. They want to say, you know, just like QAnon, it's an extension of QAnon. You want to say the vaccines are out to poison you, you know, all of these things by immigrants who themselves are getting vaccinated and boosted. So, so this kind of constant conspiracy thinking, the internal enemy, wink, wink, is there. They're trying to manipulate you deviously. This enables people to say you need a non-democratic solution.
So you talked about you've talked about sort of how restricting voter access plays into these kind of fascist techniques that you have described. But one of the things that we're also seeing is this kind of hyper-masculine rhetoric, and what seems to kind of go along with that is as a call toward female submissiveness, even though, you know, some of the prime figures are in this movement, it's just sort of a kind of a call to kind of a 1950s family style. How do you see what I'm saying, and how do you understand that?
Let's begin with the attack on abortion, which is the majority of Americans do reject the repeal of Roe versus Wade. They want to keep Roe versus Wade, but we are facing a future in which abortion rights are going to be severely curtailed. And let's be clear, there are plenty of social conservatives who are not fascists at all, who are not authoritarians or autocrats, who want to participate in the democratic process, who are against abortion. But what we find here is a kind of classic macho strutting autocrat in the figure of Trump, who obviously has no social conservative history or morals, but he's appealing to social conservatives. He's saying, I'm going to be your man. Now, that's going to draw social conservatives to him, but it also feeds into a general macho masculinist ideology where the men control the women. So it both appeals to social conservatives with an overlap of interests, even though many social conservatives would vastly prefer this to be a democratic process. And it also feeds into the idea that men are around to protect women and women need to rely on men.
And what about the racial panic idea? Because, you know, we're seeing this kind of play out as a debate within the Democratic Party, for example. They want to move forward with the programs and the policies for which they were elected. And at the same time, you're seeing this kind of furious backlash, not just from, you know, conservative opponents who are attracted to the ideologies that we're talking about, but you're also seeing it within the party itself, the Democratic Party, where people say, we know that this is stimulating a backlash, so the best thing to do is to tamp it down, not continue to stoke these racial anxieties, back off in essence. I mean, so what's your take on how that kind of tension is to be addressed?
So we have enormous racial disparities in our country. I don't need to tell this audience. Enormous and persistent racial disparities. The racial wealth gap is massive. Continues to be. And what we have as a result, and we have a massive police system. We put our money, I'm not advocating to defund the police, I'm just stating facts. We put an enormous amount of money into militarized police to police very poor populations, both white and black, and to address social problems that way. What will result repeatedly is uprisings against that, and those uprisings will be then used to justify a fascist law and order crackdown. And this is analogous to what happened in Germany when there was mass left-wing violence on the street, and this was used to justify a fascist crackdown. So what's to be done with this? I think Americans get that there are many people who are impoverished, white and black, and they get that the government should be doing something about that. It's not just a racial issue, but if we focus on the elites who are preventing us from achieving a real man fights for his leader, Donald Trump, challenging people's masculinity. What we are the glorification of January 6th and a glorification of Kyle Rittenhouse. They're stoking a large-scale, violent militia. Not just organized militias, but individual actors like Kyle Rittenhouse, and they're challenging them via their masculinity. So that's what the legacy of January 6th is. They're being transformed into heroes, and we need to stop that process as soon as possible. And every Republican politician needs to distance from the mass attempt to create and stoke eventual political violence.
That's right.
Professor Jason Stanley, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Don't want none. Don't want none. Don't want none. I don't know. Why is this on your feed?
President Trump is sending federal forces into
Probably
more
because
American cities, something that our next
you're
guest is deeply
anti-fascist.
concerned about. Jason Stanley is professor of philosophy at Yale University. In his book, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them, tells the story of the tropes that drive dictatorships. And here he is speaking to our Hari Srinivasan about why he's concerned about paving the road to authoritarianism.
Christian, thanks. Jason Stanley,
nice local
first, before we
stickers.
get into this conversation about fascism, how do you define it?
Fascism is an ideology based on power, loyalty, and fear of the other, where the other is defined ethnically or in terms of nationality or religion. And the leader represents us.
Now, you wrote this book a couple of years ago, and at the time, the reception to it was somewhat expected. A lot of people saying, you know what, this is too strong a word. He is taking some liberties here with how he defines it. It's just an anti-Trump book, etc. Now, you've got this out in paperback. You've written a little bit more about why you were scared and concerned then. What is it about the present moment that concerns you?
So first of all, we have to bear in mind that you can have a fascist social and political movement in a democracy. And that's what we're seeing across the world right now, in Brazil, in the United States. We're seeing fascist social and political movements in democracies. And what you have to look for when that happens is the press to undermine the democracy from within, to undermine its institutions, and to create new institutions, fascist institutions. Now, what are fascist institutions? The concentration camp is the classic example, a zone of lawlessness. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez drew our attention to the detention camps on the southern borders a while ago, as potential examples of this. And then militia, a sort of militia that is the police, but not the police, that functions as a kind of weapon
Sure.
for
Very
national ultranationalism, xenophobia, and in the service of the leader. And what concerns me now is that we have CBP and ICE on the streets of American cities trained in an ideology of targeting non-citizens, now directed at cities controlled by the political opposition, which are represented as lawless and out of order. And they seem to be trying to foment violence and backlash in order to create this sense of a need for a powerful leader. And so that's what concerns me now, is that we have something that might look like a militia, a national police force, whose job it is to do the president's bidding. And that looks like an institution that doesn't belong in a democracy.
You know, the acting secretary of DHS says, listen, DHS has been in the business of protecting structures, federal buildings, 10 years ago, yesterday, today, and will tomorrow. We don't necessarily need the invitation of mayors and governors.
So the literature on fascism warns us about institutions that are designed originally to protect us from foreign terrorists that are involved in colonial wars and then get directed domestically inside. The Department of Homeland Security was developed as a reaction to 9/11. It was the ideology about protecting us from terrorists, from foreign terrorists. It's an ideology directed towards colonial wars and protecting us from the backlash of colonial wars. When you start to see that kind of institution, which well preceded Trump, as you pointed out, but is no part of our American history before very recently, when you start to see that institution being directed against domestic opponents, you have to become worried.
Is there something different about the people that Border Patrol is used to dealing with versus the people inside American City?
What we've done is we're taking a group of agents who are trained to deal with non-citizens in objectifying and often horrific ways and directing them towards American citizens who are engaged in largely peaceful protests, exercising their democratic rights, and frankly, as part of a political campaign. So this is really reminiscent of bad moments in history where you have a force, a quasi-military force that has no obvious domestic role directed against citizens.
You know, there was a college friend of mine who lives in the Portland area, and he has been so incensed by what he perceives to be the ineptitude of local government and state government that, I remember this phrase he just said, when they go after the federal buildings, all bets are off. And to me, what was interesting was that there's a certain seduction to a strong sense of order. I mean, we see this happening around the world right now. It's not limited to the United States. So whether it's you want to look at Hungary or Brazil or India or the Philippines, there's something in us that seems to want chaos reduced.
So fascism is lawlessness in the name of law and order. Chaos has not been reduced in Brazil, India, the United States. Chaos has been increased. What we have is lawlessness. What these forces are doing in particular in Portland is they're actually making the protesters more angry. I think they're provoking them and creating larger demonstrations and protests, and they're doing so intentionally. Or if they themselves don't know it, they're being used intentionally to do that, because the president, his political campaign, wants to create a sense of chaos for the cameras, for television screens. So what we have again and again in these regimes, and the Philippines is a great example, is lawlessness. When the police are shooting poor people on the street, that's not law and order. That's lawlessness. What we want is to treat people in accord with principles of justice and law and order. And what these leaders do is they create chaos. They create chaos and then promise you that they're going to deal with the chaos that they create. But in fact, the chaos is what they thrive on. And that's what we're seeing in Brazil, the United States, India, and the Philippines.
In the context of what's happening in Portland, you've got the mayor, you've got the governor, you've got mayors in lots of cities that are pushing back. Isn't that a sign that our institutions are still strong enough to try and resist?
I don't really like this talk of our institutions as if our institutions are kind of like robots that walk around the country independently of us. No, we are our institutions. You, sir, are our press, and I am our universities. And unless the universities stand up and say, no, we're not institutions of left-wing ideology. We are, we don't, and unless our press stands up and say, no, you are lying, everything is going to fold. Our mayors are doing what our mayors should be doing, which is standing up against the federal government that is seeking to weaponize an institution, the Customs and Border Patrol, for an election. And the mayors are standing up for that. So I prefer not to talk about institutions, but to talk about people.
How much of this plays into propaganda, the repetition, the othering, the alienizing of people who don't see the world the way you do?
Well, that's at the very center of fascist ideology, the friend-enemy distinction. It's why Trump and Bolsonaro and Modi and Putin have such great difficulties with reality, with COVID-19. It's because they see everything in terms of a friend-enemy distinction. And the whole idea of this politics, which well precedes Trump in the United States, is to say, my political opponent isn't a legitimate opponent. My political opponent is a fundamental threat to the values you hold dear. And you might be an ordinary Christian conservative, an ordinary person who's part of our democratic process, but these liberal elites, they threaten your way of life, and you need a strong man to protect you. And you show these terrifying moments of, cosmopolitanism and, leftists gone wild or whatever, and you represent that as a terrifying threat to people. And then you say, you need a strong man here. And this is a very familiar politics that does go back to the 1930s in Germany. You represent your enemy as a communist. Good luck representing Joe Biden as a communist, but that's what you do. And so you're manufacturing dissent because it's that feeling that there's no legitimate political opponent. Your political opponent is a traitor to the country and your fundamental values, and that's why you need a tough guy to protect you.
Should we be concerned about our lack of concern, or I guess maybe the normalizing of chaos?
Absolutely. This kind of regime style, this kind of leadership style thrives on chaos. And I think we can all agree we've seen a lot of chaos. We haven't seen much order in the past 3.5 to 4 years. It's a constant stream of people going in and out of the regime.
What's up, Kingy boy?
The news cycle has been reduced to half an hour from a couple of days. A constant stream of people being replaced in the administration, so there's no stability whatsoever, and everything is about scheming and plotting, and we're grilled to our television screens, and that's how it works. It's entertainment, it's showmanship, it keeps you constantly in this fight or flight way, which feeds and gives succor to leaders who represent themselves as war leaders. As, there's always an enemy. I'm always protecting you. It's always. Really takes to repeat these old tropes of American racism that, you know, black men on streets threaten water. That doesn't take genius. That just takes repeating narratives that are deeply familiar. I think what takes genius and what takes strength of character and intelligence to say, okay, I want this, you want something else, let's compromise. That takes genius and strength of character. The analogy you draw, and it's repeatedly done in literature and fascism, Senator Red, the mob boss and the fascist leader. Remember, fascism is about ideology, loyalty, and power. So the mob boss repeatedly puts their family members, friends, and business associates in positions of power. And he's a competent person. However, the reality is present. It's all about loyalty. So how much of it is genius? You really need to see how
I don't know.
Political opponents. All of these things and many more problems, they widening economic inequality that enables a leader to come and say, I represent the people against the elites. And until we do that, we're always going to face this threat.
Jason Stanley of Yale University. The book is called How Fascism Works, now available in paperback. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much, Harry.
Alright, y'all. Shit. What?
Well, as democracy is threatened around the world, our next guest warns that danger lies closer to home, at school. In his latest book, American philosopher Jason Stanley argues that attacks on education empower authoritarian regimes by reshaping our understanding of the past.
I'm out anyway.
And he joins Hari
We're just
Srinivasan
hanging out,
to discuss.
chilling,
Yana, thanks. Jason
listening to some
Stanley, thanks so much for joining us
anti-fascist
again.
shit,
Your recent book,
and
Your
learning
Racing
about
History, starts with a
anti-fascism,
quote
learning
from
about
Vladimir
fascism.
Putin that
We had
wars
some
are
breakfast.
won by
We're just
teachers.
chilling.
Explain
Now we're done.
why this quote
Y'all have a good day.
why is this so
Appreciate you.
significant?
So what
Remember,
our
eat the
schools
rich.
do and
There
our
is no
textbooks
warfare
do
but class
is they
warfare.
give us a vision of
We are
history
not starting
that
it.
allows us to make judgments
We are
about
being
policy. In the
enslaved,
case of Russia's
unfortunately.
full-scale
And we can be
invasion of Ukraine,
chill about it.
the
and just
textbooks that
not go to work.
Russians are brought up on
Take care of each other,
do
feed
not
each other.
represent Ukraine as having an independent history. They do not
And say no to
represent
the
the Ukrainian
rich.
language as genuinely
Thank you.
separate
Have a good day.
language, and they erase the history of genocide